Welcome to the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. I'm your host, Jacob Cooper, best-selling author of Life After Breath and the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. For those of you who are new to my channel, we thank you for checking it out. Please consider hitting that subscribe button as well as bell notification icon to stay up to date to weekly interviews and conversations coming your way. Today's guest on the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder is Chris Ryan. Chris is a co-author of the new release book, Helping Fathers Heal. He also facilitates support groups, for fathers who have lost children, and he's going to be speaking a lot about grief, his own personal, powerful story of transformation, and really, particularly highlighting the male aspect of grief and how men, could really work with grief, as well as women who may be listening as well too. As we all grieve, it is natural. It is a part of life, and everyone needs to learn to self-validate their feelings and being able to process what they're going through. And so I know this conversation is going to be very helpful and impactful for all of my viewers. So without further ado, we welcome Chris Ryan on the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. Chris Ryan, thank you so much for being here as an honored guest in the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. It's great to have you.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Jacob. It's a thrill. I've been following you a bit and interested in your story as well. So I feel honored.
I am truly blessed to have you in front of me here today. I know a friend that I dearly respect that we're, deeply connected to, which we'll get, into throughout the course of the dialogue. Elizabeth Blasson spoke incredible high volumes of your work. And to me, anything Elizabeth says, I will go with. But for those who aren't familiar with Elizabeth, she is, the co-founders of Helping Parents Heal, an organization that, deals with grief and loss of loved ones and merges afterlife connectivity to really work with the grief processing. But I know, Chris, you have your own unique story that I think would be a tremendous asset and inspirational and touching to many of my viewers. But for those of you who didn't, really hear of your story, can you tell us a little bit about what you do and what brought you to your current work? Because you're really starting to make the rounds and impact so many people. I just saw you on the Suzanne Giesemann, podcast, and you really are touching a lot of minds and hearts. But the story, I'm sure was very tragic and unfortunate, at a certain point in time.
Absolutely. It was and is and has been a catalyst for my path to hit a crossroads. My career in marketing and advertising, was going well. But about 2.5-3 years ago, it was September of 2021 that my 23-year-old son passed from fentanyl poisoning. And that just scrambled everything. So, my story kind of restarted that day. And so the work that I'm doing now, it's kind of hard to say. It's like I'm still kind of one foot in my career corporate world, but I'm being pulled more and more into this other area where I'm really trying to understand and help men with grief. And there's not as much help out there available for just guys. I mean, there's a lot, and Helping Parents Heal is wonderful. That was my entry into this world. And Helping Fathers Heal is an affiliate group. It's a subset within Helping Parents Heal. But it's a very small group because oftentimes men don't reach out. They're maybe not comfortable with some of the emotions that go with grief, or they just put their head down and get back in life and kind of isolate or compartmentalize the grief. So more and more, I've been drawn into this place of storytelling with the other dads. And that's what we've been doing recently. We just came out with a book of stories from some of the fathers that are in this affiliate group, telling their story about their child, their journey through grief, and most importantly, how they've found healing and connection and hope on the other side.
Well, Chris, do you mind showing the book that you published? Because it's a beautiful cover, and I know many of my viewers would love to see it. But
Yep.
yes, Helping Fathers Heal, forward by Gordon Smith, an international medium. I know he's affiliated with Helping Parents Heal as well, but do
Mhm.
check it out. It's on Amazon, your book, correct?
Amazon and Kindle ebooks. Yes.
Wow. So tell us a little bit about, I mean, I know you touched on it, but you highlighted a significant piece, that there's a difference or a dichotomy with maybe what you've seen with how men grieve and women grieve. Is that what you've discovered a little bit in your personal, journey, and as well as, interactions with others? And how have
Mhm.
you been able, what's maybe a secret sauce, because I work in the mental health field, for guys, to start to really own their emotions and to allow themselves to feel? Like, how did you, compile so many guys together and work out their own grief processing?
That's an interesting question. In going to the first, for me, it was the conference 2022 was the first Helping Parents Heal conference I went to. And I was asked to go by my wife after my son transitioned. She just dove into research and educating herself about where he is, what happens. She started suggesting a few things to me. I was still pretty much in the work world. I was having a hard time reconciling my feelings and what to do with them. I was having a hard time sleeping, reliving a lot of the visions that I had of him when he was in the hospital, because he was in ICU for several days and was not able to come back. And we ultimately felt that his spirit had transitioned before we got to the hospital. He was just a body at that point. We've even
Wow.
heard from mediums that he was in the room with us, but he wasn't in his body at that time. But I went to the concert, and it was mostly women, probably 75%. There were dads there, but a lot of the dads were there to help and support their wives. I
This
found in
is
my
at this is at the Helping Parents Heal conference, correct?
Yes, exactly. It
Yes.
was in Phoenix, 2022. So it's held every 2 years, and another one is coming up this summer.
Mhm.
But in my own case, my wife, she was able to reach out and start connecting and joining some groups, and I think women, and I hate to stereotype anybody or make generalizations, but I do think women have an easier time reaching out, talking with each other,
Mhm.
sharing emotions together, and perhaps being vulnerable. Whereas men, and this again, broad generalization, but I do think that based on what I've seen, guys tend to be a little more protective of their emotions and aren't really sure where it's safe to share them.
Mm.
And so, uh, in our culture, especially in Western culture, men are kind of groomed to be the providers, the protectors. I mean, that goes beyond Western culture. That's just going back, centuries. Men have always had a certain role in terms of protecting the family and providing. So when it comes to emotion, I think so many guys feel that they're just pushed to go on and
Mm.
expected to go on. And if we're young enough to still be, in our careers, our boss wants us to come back to work. I mean, there's a lot of layers there
Mm.
that it's hard to work through grief when you're really just being thrown all these other things that you need to be doing, taking care of the siblings, the wife, the
Mm.
family, paying the bills, going back to work. And oh, by the way, your heart is broken, you
Mm.
know?
Well, it's very hard. You're trying to just tread water as it is, and then you have this to add to it. It's overwhelming, and
Yeah.
I don't know how anyone with such an incredible loss is able to just move to the next day. But,
Yeah.
I guess we have no choice. And you mentioned the conference, and I know that that was a pivotal part of your transformation.
Mhm.
And I'm going to be at the conference as well, presenting this upcoming August, and maybe I'll see you. I don't know if you'll be there
Oh, yeah.
with your book. I hope to see you out in Phoenix. But could you share with viewers, like, was there a moment where you had an undeniable knowing that your son was there? And what was that moment like? Because I heard a little bit about it, but maybe it's a really fascinating interaction that happened at the conference, from what I understand.
Yeah, we were in the General Assembly, so that means it's the full, 850 some odd people in the room.
Mm.
It was one of the, I guess you'd call it a keynote presentation, but psychic medium Farrah Gibson, who's also lives in Phoenix, she was on stage. And I had never met her before. I really didn't know anything about any of the mediums. This was all kind of new to me. But she kicked off her shoes and got up on stage. And it was very interesting because she was going to areas of the room and really tuning into some of the children of the parents, but she would know where the parents were sitting. And so very early on in her presentation, she came over to our side of the room and she started talking about socks, really crazy, wild, colorful socks. And that was something that my son loved. He was he was a very free spirit, very independent, loved wearing those crazy socks that have flamingos or pizzas or, just cartoon characters. He just had a crazy style
Wow.
sense about him. So that we raised our hand and she came over and then she asked another question about the socks and I wore them too. And then I said, okay, yeah, I got it, because my wife had just bought us both Pelican socks. And so she said, "Yeah, you're who I'm with." And so she started going through some evidence
Wow.
that was. We stood up, and it was so the feeling was a combination of thrilling, and is this really happening? Kind of a surreal feeling,
Mm.
and also very conspicuous because we're standing up in a room full of people, and they all want their kids to come through,
Mm.
but. Into the reading, and it was only about 7 minutes long. We do have, I got a video of it, and I actually created a side by side of the evidence and of my son doing things like
Wow.
how he would play the guitar of this project I had at home that I'd screwed up, where I'd finished the wood improperly, and he brought that through. None of this would be available to anybody on social media. I wouldn't post my carpentry mistakes on social media. So by the time it was done, everybody in the room was like cheering us on because they realized something really special was happening. And when we sat down and it was goosebumps, tingles, because we
Wow.
knew that our son connected with her and his personality connected. And it was just a gift. It was a thrilling gift to have that moment. And for me, it was a breakthrough because I realized for sure that there's evidence that he's around and that he's paying attention to what we're doing.
Wow. And as I know, Suzanne, who you just had an interview, talks about an NOE, like a no other explanation. It seems like you had a lot of those.
Yeah.
Where, as you said, you're a complete stranger. She didn't know a thing about you. It's funny that you mentioned she took off her. You said she's gone on the stage, took off her shoes, and she's talking about taking off socks. So that was like a funny kind of thing. But it's just the evidence is undeniable.
Yeah.
And for you and for my viewers, I'm sure there's like there's two components of grief. There's a human part, but then there's this other spirit connection that we have that could shine a light on some of that darkness and that heaviness that we have. I mean, for you going through your grief journey, did that moment help you to a degree? Like, how did that work with where you were on a human level, knowing undeniably so that your son, is there somewhere around you?
Well, you used a good phrase. It's kind of like shining a light. I did feel that the darkness that comes with grief, it's an isolating feeling. You feel like no one understands. You feel like your loved one is gone. You feel a sense of separation. Well, when you have a reading like that, the there is no separation. You realize that that the love is still there, and that's so powerful. That not only is that spirit still around, but they're paying attention to our lives. You know, they want to comfort us. They want us to feel better. So I almost feel like it's my duty, my obligation to my son to try to heal, because I do think that's what he would want for us. He wants us to go on and do things. And if I do things in honor of him and in his memory that would help others, such as the book, all the better. So, you know, we all want to have a meaningful existence in life. And if the tragedy of the passing of a loved one can help us bring more meaning to that loss, and then also help others through a similar loss, it's a double bonus. But it is kind of like illuminating a part of your heart that is perhaps gone dark, and all of a sudden you feel the warmth and the light that my child is here.
Wow. And yeah, I mean, you and Helping Parents Heal use the term heal, which to me is not the, absence of pain. It's working through it with compassion, empathy, awareness. Much like if you have a wound, you're not just going to ignore it. You're going to tend to it. You're not going to be enslaved by it, but you're going to try to work with some other degree of a higher force, whether that be compassion, surrendering to a greater force to work with, in congruency and partnership with that pain. And so it seemed for you, the way out was through it. You weren't immunized from all that, but you were able to tune into a higher channel to allow that light to be shed on some of those dark void that you were feeling.
Yeah, that's well put. And healing is kind of a funny word, because we're never the same afterwards. So it's not like a cut where your skin grows back and you can't tell it's there. It's like, no, there's scar tissue. I mean, the loss of a loved one like that, even a dear pet that you've lost, I mean, it's not the same, but any loss, any grief can leave scar tissue, and you heal from that, but it doesn't really go away. You're not really the same person again. You can be a better person. You can make choices to try to improve your perspective on what life is all about. But I just try to go forward through it and not
bypass
it away.
Yeah. Yes, you're right. I mean, your world has changed, in so many ways after something as traumatic and as tragic as that is. But for yourself today, obviously your life has changed a lot, in many ways. Could you maybe share a little bit of how your life has changed, and have you been able to find that meaning phase of, to a degree in your life? Because it seems like a lot of what you do is, really is immersed in that,
Yes, that is true. I've found myself in the last year or two kind of refocusing on things. I mean, I was already involved in charity work, and I was sitting on the board of directors for a couple of nonprofits. And I always wanted to be able to give back, but my focus has really been somewhat redirected into the heart as being kind of this place that there's just a lot of need in our world right now for healing. And it's not just grieving fathers. I mean, there's and you may have heard this as well. I know some of your guests have talked about it, how there's shifts happening in the world right now. I would rather be one of those people that's trying to spread love and connection and help people feel more connected to each other and to their departed loved ones. I'd rather be that type of a worker. Some people call light workers. I don't know that I'm doing that, because I'm not really psychic. Although I do still have incredible dreams about my son, and I feel like I do have contact with him from time to time. But focusing on the Helping Fathers Heal group, being there every Wednesday, it's a weekly Zoom support group for guys, and it's a safe place for guys to come. Every week just about every week there's somebody new that has a new story, and that may be, in kind of a triage situation where they have not even begun to heal. They're still in a shock. It may have only been a matter of weeks or a few months since their child may have, passed tragically. Sometimes it's a long extended illness, but no matter what the circumstances, that dad needs help. And that's what we all love to do in the group, is we embrace each other. We hold each other up. We let the guys know, hey, I've got your back. If there's crying, that's okay. If there's F-bombs, that's okay. We sometimes will laugh and celebrate victories because we are doing things in honor of our children. Some dads have blood drives. Some dads have created memorial gardens. All of these things can be ways of finding meaning, as you said, and healing and giving more purpose to our lives. So that's really the direction I feel like I'm pointed right now, is trying to help continue to educate myself, but then also be in the midst of the pain and being courageous enough to try to help people through that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big correlation with pain and purpose, and you see it all the time, with people who have tremendous platforms and influence in society. It often, their calling comes from that deep wound, that, like you said before, may never go away, but together, you're able to really align with others and develop community, and there's transformation and beauty that you could see, I'm sure, with these Zoom meetings that you're having. It's just some of the cohesion and just this movement that you're a part of is something just beyond words, I'm sure.
There are no words when it comes to grief, and when it comes to healing, and when it comes to those little fragments of light that come poking through in your heart to illuminate those dark corners. Yeah, there are no real words for that. And I think that's a part of writing the book that was therapeutic, is that a lot of the dads that were contributors, the book consists of 25 stories, 25 chapters from 25 fathers, and each one tells the story of their child and celebrates the life and the relationship that they had with that child, and does talk about the transition, but we talk about how we've found help and where we've found help. Wow. And so in a way, this storytelling is kind of a cathartic, therapeutic process, because a lot of us, I'm not a writer, I'm not really a journaler, but I did find that going back into that story and digging up the emotions and putting words to them, it did help. It gave me a sense that my story has been told, Sean's story has been saved, and that others may now benefit from that. Wow. And so, some of the quieter dads were some of the authors that were the most eloquent on page. And I was so surprised and happy that we had as many guys volunteer to write the book, to write a chapter.
Wow. I have beyond respect for yourself and the other contributors to this book on many extents, but as a fellow, author, I could say it takes a lot of courage to get your words out there, to be vulnerable. I mean, in fact, one of the biggest fears on the hierarchy of fears beyond death is any form of public speaking or displaying your words out there in public.
Yeah.
And so when you're in grief, you don't want to go to retreats. You want to retreat usually, and obviously there's a dichotomy with mourning and grief. There's a difference, but many times from the people that I speak to who have experienced tragic loss, they want to self-retreat, self-isolate. And so for yourself and some of the other fathers, how did you get to yourself to that place where you said, you know what, this, I need to do this. It's something I need to do. Like, when did that like tipping point happen with you and some of the other, members?
Yeah, I think I loved what you said there. And I do think that a lot of the fathers, as a part of our process, we have had times when we had to retreat
Mhm.
and create memorials or a pilgrimage of some kind. And I know for me, and I know for several of the fathers, writing their story was that kind of stepping back, being quiet, and spending the time to put it down on paper, to reflect. And that's, again, another strong thing, a component of grief healing, but reflection, we don't always have time for that in our culture, and guys don't always give themselves
Sure.
the grace to have that.
Absolutely.
So, but the idea, it was about a year ago that we first cooked this up. I mentioned it in a meeting of the dads last August, so less than a year ago. So the fact that these guys were willing to write their story and that we could edit and get it published in less than a year surprises many people who have been through the book writing process. But I did have help. I mean, Tom Madsen was helping me with the editing, and he, worked with the dads. Some of them, they were interviews, verbal interviews. Some of them, we really had to help them compose their story because some of them needed that. But it's just, a word came to me this morning, and I don't know if it came for a purpose of this meeting or not, this podcast, but you've heard of doulas. There are doulas that help with birth, and there are some doulas that help with death. But I almost feel like we're doulas for grief in this fathers meeting, that to help somebody move through that process and let them know that they're going to be okay, that they're going to survive. But this is just a really, really hard road that we're walking together. But you're not alone, and you don't have to be alone. But if you do need a retreat, you do want to be alone, that's a part of the process too. Just know that you can always come back, that we're always here. My wife and I are planning next year to walk the Camino and go to Spain, and that'll be our own pilgrimage, but it won't be our first. We've scattered ashes, and that was our own form of retreat in a pilgrimage. We've done it both in the ocean, which was magical, and then we did some in Sedona, which was also very, very powerful. So, yeah, long answer to your question. I'm sorry, Jacob, but I like the idea of retreating and having that be one of the safe places you can go, but knowing that you've got a community that's always there for you and that you can come back to when you're ready.
Yeah. From talking to you and many of my guests, it seems there's a big support system with developing community and grief. And I'm so glad that you have taken on this leadership role, have been an ambassador for some of the other fathers. I'm sure it's a club that you, in many ways, don't want to be a part of, but for right now, you walked into this, it wasn't your fault, but how you walk out of it is, what's the task at hand. And you're, I'm sure, doing everything you can together with these fathers to live one day at a time with, the best you can. And some days that day is, I'm sure it's a roller coaster, but you're doing it together. And that's a beautiful thing, to be one with the team, with the group, with people who, have walked your path that no one else could really understand if you haven't been there yourself.
Yeah. I think community and connection is so important. And that's why that's the subtitle of the book, Grief, Hope, and Our Search for Connection, because we are, as men, trying to find a way to connect both with each other, which a lot of times guys, they don't have as much of a support system as perhaps our wives or female companions might do. But connecting with the spirit of our child or children. So the word connection goes two ways in that title. And, most of the guys on the call, we're also tuned into the fact that somehow we signed up for this. Soul contracts, I believe, are a real thing. And why we've been chosen to have such a difficult experience in this life, I don't understand it yet. Maybe one day I will, perhaps when I am on the other side with my son and we're able to share, but I just have to trust that this is the path I'm supposed to be walking right now. And I'm all the dads in the group, especially the authors of the book, we all feel that this is a journey that somehow we're meant to be on, and as bad or difficult or painful as it is, we want to make something good happen from that.
Be one heck of a celebration party if that's the case. If I have no doubt that we do. Nothing's random. There is contracts. We're connected. There's a greater intelligence governing our lives. So, no question about that, Chris. And it seems like it's the flock and the shepherd kind of gathering the herd together, and you guys are all coming together with tragedy brought you together, but you're one and you're working together and you're having a ripple effect on others. Now, with your book, I'm wondering if this was premeditated or just kind of happened organically. Because I find with grief that people who have lost loved ones, they constantly talk about the trauma at the ending when their loved one passed, and that's the fixation. Yeah. Why that is in many particular ways, I mean, certainly in different religions, it's like focused on the ending, and that's like the fixation instead of the full enchilada, the life, the meaning. And it seems like your book and the stories compiled took a bit of a different turn, where it wasn't just about how they died, but how they lived. Was that intentional? And if so, how is that outlook helpful? If, for maybe a viewer who has lost a loved one, who's very fixated on that ending phase, to maybe have a juxtaposition to look at their life and how they lived and how that could really work with where you are in your own grief.
Yeah, that's a good question. We did give the fathers somewhat of a framework. We sent out just so that, because you ask somebody to write a chapter of a book, and a lot of people are just going to say, "Oh no, I'm not a writer." Mm-hmm. So we created a series of questions, 10 questions, that would make it a simple assignment. Just write a couple of paragraphs to answer each of these questions, and the questions didn't end with the passing of their child. That was just a part of it. But, we wanted to hear, what was the child like? What was your relationship with that child like? If you're comfortable, tell us about the circumstances around the transition. What were some of the first reactions that you had after that happened? The initial shock. Where did you find help? Were you surprised by anything in this grief process? And then what would you recommend to other fathers who are going through the same thing? Were there any particular things that you did that you found helpful? Like in my story, my wife and I, we found it helpful to have several EMDR sessions just to help us get over the trauma of seeing my son hooked up to a bunch of machines in the ICU. I couldn't get that out of my head. And there are other fathers in our group who have suffered through finding their children after a suicide. And, there are tools there. So we really wanted the dads to share what were some of the tools. I mean, we're guys, we like to fix stuff. So having that as a part of the story seemed to just make sense that we don't want to be stuck telling the same story that has the same tragic ending and it doesn't go anywhere. That happens to people. I mean, that's what happens in life. Sometimes people do get stuck there, and their grief kind of I don't know if metastasizes is the right word, but it just becomes hardened and it becomes a part of their identity and they
Yeah,
latch onto it.
it seems like their whole time is just stopped and frozen in that moment, and they could be living 40, 50 years, but they're still on that one day, and that is hard.
And I have done enough research to know that some people feel that that is their way of holding on to their child,
Mm.
is by holding on to the grief, holding on to the moment, holding on to whatever it might be, that keeps you kind of stuck. I hate to, I mean, it's a strong word, but some people just really want to feel close to that child. And sometimes the grief can be the thing that they think bonds them.
Sure.
And I feel so blessed, and it's a sense of freedom, just like what happened when Farrah Gibson did that reading. It was like busting through that feeling of hardened, heart, of being stuck. And it just felt like, no, this is a whole new world. There's a whole new reality that I could be living. And it doesn't mean being detached or dismissing or walking away from the memory of my son. No, it means walking with him and allowing his life and his continued spiritual existence be my muse. And that's the part that really brings me a feeling of hope, is to have a softening of the heart and an opening of, the path. The journey doesn't have to be as painful, but we do that together. I truly feel that acceptance and connection with others is those are probably two of the strongest things, I think, in the healing journey, at least for me.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I think your insight is spot on and very congruent with what we do in the mental health field. For instance, for clients who go through trauma or grief or even traumatic grief, we recommend at a certain point narrative therapy, where they start to really process maybe their life before. At a certain point, when there's a readiness, bit by bit, gradual exposure to processing, that trauma or that pain. And then afterwards, being able to process and seeing maybe their life 15 to 20 years and how they've been able to progress through it, the possibility that they could give themselves the permission to it. But I
Mhm.
think when you're writing or when you're journaling, it's more than just a catharsis. It does something to us, at least for me. I don't know if you could agree with this with some of your other viewers, where there's a story that happens in your life, and your life could be defined by that story, or you could take that pen of life and define that story. It's a way of getting the power back when you might feel powerless over, tragedies that come into your life, and being able to not be defined by that story, but to define it. Is that maybe something that has happened to you and something you've noticed with some of the other writers, where just they were able to just have that catharsis and process the pain, but also it gave them a sense of power back when they felt powerless, in the face of tragedy?
Yes. I think that's 100% correct. I think that grief is one of those areas where there's not a lot of language, um, not 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 just English. I just think as a human, it's hard to put into words some of these scary feelings that can overwhelm us, and grief being one of them. And, when people say to each other, there are no words, that is true. There are no words. But if we take the time to piece together our story and try to put it into a language that we feel like we can connect to that story, and then at the same time we can move through it, and like you said, perhaps create a different circumstance for that story to end, a way for that evolution of emotional reaction and grief. But yeah, it can be very scary when grief is just that hairy monster in the corner that doesn't show itself.
Yeah.
By writing it, sometimes I think it does help it reveal itself, and maybe even takes a bit of its power away, because you realize it's something that you can work with.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, many times when you're having depression or anxiety, you tend to want to avoid that thing that's most triggering. But really, congruent with therapy, it's by gradually addressing that thing that actually, there's transformation. And it's counterintuitive. You would think like the thing that most bothering you, you need to shield yourself away from, avoid. But I'm sure you could agree that that is when it really most intensifies
Yeah.
um, through long term. Now, the question that I had was, you mentioned there was a couple authors spoke about their child and what their child meant to them and some of the meaning of their child. For viewers who have never met your son, I'm just curious as terms of how you're able to connect with him in this life. Do you do anything maybe that makes you feel closer to him? Is there something that he stood for that you try to embody? I'm just curious if that is a part of your grief journey, just in terms of, finding that connectivity to him beyond the veil and really being able to live through him and have his life not go in vain, and just to kind of continue the ripple effect that he started.
Yeah. Um, Good question. So that could go two ways. There are conscious things that I try to do to connect with him. Uh, we shared a love of music,
Mm,
and he and I listened and went to a lot of shows together. So I know for some parents that can be a difficult kind of a triggering situation,
mhm,
but for me, it makes me feel close to him. And on Spotify, sometimes I'll just put on a radio station that is based around one of his favorite bands and see what comes up. And sometimes what comes up are things that I never would have known, but I remember that song coming out of his bedroom. So it's a way for me to open up a chance for him to play around with what signals he can send me. But it also makes me feel close to him. Then I do. There are other less conscious things that I set an intention sometimes. For example, when I go to bed at night, sometimes if I really feel like I want to connect with him, I stare at a picture. There's a picture in my bathroom that is just one of my favorite pictures of him. His eyes just come through. It's in the book. It's in the introduction. It's a
wow.
beautiful, beautiful picture. And his eyes are just so piercing. And to me, I see all the life there. And so if I gaze at that hard enough and long enough, and I lay down and just go to bed, just start to drift off and just, wrap myself up in my great gratitude and love for Sean. Sometimes, and it's only happened a few times, I can count the times on one hand, but we have had mystical connections. And not all the dads can do this. I'm not saying that this is a technique that can work for anybody, but I do think that if you put an intention out there for your loved one, for the universe, for a spirit, to find a way to connect, and you take steps in that area, you calm yourself, you think, you meditate, you change your vibration. I do think that there are times when you can reach through the veil when it gets thinner. And some people can do this much easier than others. I mean, I'm so jealous of mediums who are able to just at an instant, 4 times
Right,
a day, they go into a trance and they're
right,
able to
right, right.
somebody. It's an amazing blessing, a gift. But for me, I have found great comfort in just the few times when I've had a very, very special connection with Sean. Usually, though, it's in kind of a sleep state, or it's a very, very vivid dream where it felt like, wow, I actually experienced things there that I don't normally experience.
Wow.
Um, and I'm not alone in that. The other fathers in the book have expressed and described those kinds of experiences. So, but then others have never cannot dream, or they don't remember their dreams. And so, I feel for them, and I hope that changes for them, or that they find another tool or a way to feel the connection. But I do try to consciously make connection with Sean, and I do talk to him. Just thank him for things. Just weird synchronicities. I go to the beach and I see pelicans. I mean, he and I both had pelican tattoos. We
Wow.
had them done on the same day by the same artist.
Wow.
I go to the beach and I thank him, even though I know that he doesn't live in that pelican's body. Pelicans are natural to the beach, but I thank him because I love that. And that's why we put three little pelicans
Wow.
on the cover. It's a little secret Easter egg for our family because that's just one of the ways. Synchronicities are one of the ways that I think our loved ones try to connect with us, and we just have to believe it, allow it, and thank them, and bring me more.
That gratitude positionality is something that I hear commonly from my guests, and that really helps them to not only see signs but to appreciate it. It's like, when you are just in a state of just deep sadness or anger, you could have them like implode in front of your face, but if you're in that state, it's very hard to be moved. But when you're in a state of gratitude, you recognize those little things are not so little, they're really big, and you're able to really feel yourself elevate and connect with them, and really just like rise above a lot of that heaviness. So that's a beautiful thing that you just highlighted, and I hope some of my viewers in their own ways could start to look with an attitude of gratitude, because I really feel that helps us rise up through our own condition. Now, obviously, being in the mental health field, and I'm sure you have studied grief and read through a lot of the literature, there was a time when there was like a set criteria for grief, step 1 through 5. And certainly as guys, we probably appreciate this, particularly you. I know you mentioned you like tools, you like to fix things, figure things out, stuff like that. And now as time goes on, recognized, hey, we're nonlinear beings, the processing is nonlinear. We're unique. Our relationship with our loved ones unique. And so it's not a one size fits all. But I'm just curious, through the work that you've done, in terms of the groups that you've led, your own personal journey, is there something that may be potentially universal in terms of supporting one, or, just like a step for someone in grief, or maybe particularly a male in grief versus a female, and how they could work through their grief differently? Because what I often hear with females is, my grief is much harder. That was a biological link. My husband doesn't understand what I'm going through. But then guys feel disvalidated because their voice isn't like seen as significant, or their pains don't even bother. So maybe speak to that a little bit, if you can have any insight from your own journey, because I think that would be very helpful to my viewers.
Well, yeah, and I can speak for my own journey. I know that different dads find different sources of comfort and moving through their grief. Some have had success with a grief counselor. Some have not. Some said that was not helpful. So it can really depend on both the individual, the father or the parent, but then also, I think that the universe or the spirit, they can provide some of these things for you if you just open yourself up to it. I started by just looking at some different books on signs, and that was like the first step down the path of, okay, signs are real. I'm not the only one that's seen a sign. That is something that I can actually try to latch onto and notice more. So I think educating yourself, for me, was helpful.
Sure.
And you're right. There is no consistent set of steps to get through the process. And I know that a lot of guys would like it to be that. A lot of parents would like it to be that simple.
Sure.
Check the box. You move on to the next. You go around, collect $200 if you pass go. But grief is not like that. And you'll have setbacks. You'll have days where you feel like, okay, I'm better. I might not have to feel the way I did again, because now today is a different day. And then a few days later, you may have something that takes you back down again. So, just having a lot of grace for yourself and letting yourself go up and down with the flow, not fighting it and not pushing beyond what you're capable of, but reaching out. If you need help, reach out. But for me, I did some research. I read a couple of books where parents were connecting with their children, and then read David Kessler's book on finding meaning, which he does talk about the sixth step. And of course, he worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on the stages on death and dying, but then he came in on grief and grieving. And I think there's some discussion in your world, the more clinical
mental health arena. Yeah.
If those are really stages of grief, because I know that not all parents go through every single stage. It's really it's a bit different. Like there was bargaining with Sean. There was just no one. We tried to bargain with him for years by keeping him away from some of the things that were luring him into addiction.
Right.
When it was over, there was no bargaining. It was all about acceptance. And so we tried to get to that last step pretty quickly, but finding meaning, finding a purpose, finding a way to do something positive, I think that's a great step for anybody. But I think with guys in particular, we want to do something.
A call to action. And that's something that you're doing, certainly with your compiled book and your Zoom meetings.
Yeah.
But yes, absolutely. And why go through it otherwise? I think it's just great for it to add, hopefully, to something meaningful and positive. And certainly you're standing for that. Absolutely. But yeah, David is pivotal because, well, grief, what I loved about Elizabeth's work is that she made something that, was not universal, grief, to be more universal, but the processing of grief is not universal. So that was the issue, but the meaning phase, I think, is beautiful. And even with helping parents heal, you could even have a seventh, potential phase where the knowing phase, even that you have this knowing of that connectivity of your loved one and yourself. So it's like you said before, it's very subjective, but each person hopefully could find their own unique connection, despite some of their own personal incongruency with the format, the general format, but at least allowed it to be, have, a table conversation. Yeah. And David once said, you don't say to someone, hey, you've got a cold or a heart disease, just get over it.
Right.
You would never say that. So why would you say that to someone with any type of mental health condition or grief or level of acuity? You exhaust compassion, hopefully. And that's, I think, just having people to allow themselves to just be where they are is pivotal at any walk of life, particularly in grief.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I hope that this book, because there's 25 stories, there's 25 different ways different guys have tried to get through their grief. So it's not a silver bullet. There's not a single path. But I would hope that, a lot like what you were just talking about, that people who have not lost a child might be able to read and relate and have some compassion for those of us who have, so that they'll know the importance of connection. And we're not radioactive. We yearn for people that have the courage to stand with us and give us a hug. Some of the best moments I've had were when friends that knew what I've gone through have just come up and given me a hug. You don't have to have any kind of solution or magic wand. It's like, just be here with me. Don't go away. Don't be one of those people that goes away. Be one that checks in. And I hope, maybe this book will fall into the hands of a few people who will learn how to deal with loved ones who are suffering through grief. Because I do think that this connection goes beyond just this grieving community. It's about us as a culture, getting comfortable and knowing how to help others with grief. Don't just run away from it like, your hair's on fire. We just want to belong. It's like you said, the fear of getting up in front of others, that it's related to that fear of being exposed. And somebody going up to someone who's grieving, that's another opportunity to be exposed. And if that person that you're hugging that's grieving, if they start crying, a person can feel like, oh my God, I'm sorry, I'll leave now. I made you cry. Wow. No, it could be really a sacred moment that we feel safe enough to cry with you. So just hang in there, stay with us, have the courage to just have those difficult relationships where all you do is just give them a hug, ask them how they're doing, and you can't save them, you can't fix them, but let them know that you're there.
And you are my brother. I know you are a very modest man. You had a hard time calling yourself a light worker, but I could certainly here to attest that you are beyond a light worker. You're a beacon of healing, of hope to so many, and your work is just going to continue to go on. So thank you, Chris, for all that you do. Now, for my viewers who are interested and maybe reading your book, or trying to maybe potentially contact you, or maybe a father who may be going through difficulties and with their own loss, like where would be the best way to find all things Chris Ryan at this time?
That's so funny you ask, because I've been on a couple of podcasts where that question is a common one at the end, and I probably should create a website for the book, because I haven't. I mean, I've got my business is chrisryanvideo.com. That's because that's what I do. I created the video with Farah and the evidence.
Sure.
chrisryan.com. There's a contact page on there. Feel free to reach out if you want to have a conversation. I'm totally game for that. But the book, it's available on Kindle and Amazon, so you can learn more about helping fathers heal. And that's another place you'll find me, is in that group, Helping Fathers Heal. It's a Facebook group. Anybody that's watching or listening to this, if you want to join, there's just a couple simple questions just to make sure that we don't get, salespeople and solicitors in the group.
Sure.
But
I want to make sure to vet as something as vulnerable. But so it's an open-ended group, in a sense that if you are a father, you have lost a child, you could still join and be a part of the weekly meetups and get into contact you through the Facebook group. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So viewers, do check out Chris's book, and if you're a father out there and you're looking for some support, highly recommend getting in touch with Chris's Facebook group, and continuing to follow his work. Well, Chris Ryan, truly thank you for being here as my guest. I know this interview is really going to touch a lot of minds and hearts, and certainly thank you for the work that you're doing, and just your call to action, to be there for so many others and to really have the courage to get your word out. I know it's really going to help out. It already has, I'm sure, a lot of viewers who have lost or even haven't gone through losses, but it's a book for all. So thank you.
Thank you. And for those who are interested in helping parents heal, the conference this August will be streamed. So even though the attendance is closed right now, they're on a waiting list. But my understanding is that people can still view the sessions, your session, Jacob. There's a lot of healing to be had and found with Helping Parents Heal. So Helping Fathers Heal isn't my group. It was already there before me. I'm just, the one that put this book together. But thanks for having me. And I do hope that it helps at least somebody.
I know it already has, and will continue. Well, Chris, thank you so much for a generous time, and we'll look to follow your work as it evolves, and looking forward to seeing you at the conference.
Appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you too. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Well, that was a wonderful interview with Chris Ryan. highly recommending his co-authored book, Helping Fathers Heal, which, was compiled with other, stories of other fathers who have lost, children and their own transformative stories. So I also do recommend checking out Chris's support group. If you have, if you're a father, you have lost a child, Chris really does a lot of good work here on the world. So I know many of you really benefited from this conversation and, are deeply touched and inspired by Chris's sharing and personal story. So thank you for tuning in. Wonderful dialogue. We look forward to seeing you here on the Wisdom Jacob's Ladder next week. Thank you all.